Should be good.
Yeah. Good.
Well, good evening, Calvary Chapel. How are you? Yes, it is great to be with you again. Enjoyed today already. If you can hear my voice there in the back, thank you guys. You can call in. Anyone still out in the lobby? We do feel truly honored to have Dr. Lutzer in our midst and his wife, and we're looking forward to an evening of well, I think it's timely based upon what we've been dealing with here recently and what we've been dealing with culturally and what it is that the Lord has laid upon Dr. Lutzer's heart to share with us is going to be wonderful. So we're going to have a bit of a 40-45 minute session, and then we'll take a bit of a break, and then we're going to all regather, and we'll sort of come back for the second piece that sort of ties everything together, which is critical for us. You're going to get equipped, you're going to get edified, you're going to get trained and taught, and then we're going to be inspired and challenged to know what it is that we may do while we face what it is that I think it'll be altogether clear that we do face. And so you mentioned the potential to, you asked if we had any people in the political space in the room. Yeah. We do have a few. I think Michelle Renault, where are you? Can you stand up, Michelle? Here's a state representative from our fellowship. Stay standing. We've got Derek Green, who's running for a secretary position here in the House. Am I missing anyone else?
Sabrina.
Pardon me?
Sabrina.
Where are you, Sabrina? Oh, well, good. Stand up real quick and let everyone give you. Wonderful that you're here.
And then can I introduce the Millers?
You can. Yes.
I'm going to introduce the Millers. They can stand up right now, and it is that is the Millers, isn't it?
There they are. They're right there.
Yeah, this young lady, I want to tell you about her. She and her husband, she especially, gave birth to 7 children, but they had 7 children, and they had no TV. They read books instead. Would it be a shock?
Would it be a shock?
Would it be a shock if I were to tell you that all of their 7 children turned out very well? And she is a representative in Washington, in the House of Representatives, and her husband is in the House of Representatives in Illinois. And whenever they were in the Chicago area, they always attended Moody Church, so they've been friends for a long time. Let's give them a hand. Oh, and then while I'm introducing, I want my lovely wife, Rebecca, to stand. Rebecca, we have... I want to just say this, Pastor. We've been married for 56 years. Is it 56 or 57? And many people get married and they have no idea what marriage is. So if you are planning marriage, I'm going to give you the best marriage advice you've heard in a single sentence. Marriage is 2 people solving problems together that they'd have never had if only they'd stayed single.
Wonderful. Okay. I love it. Okay, it's a warm beginning. Let me open this up in prayer, and we'll turn our attention to what we've got to hear. Father, what a treasure to be here in this house. We are blessed people. The lines have fallen to us in pleasant places. They really have. If we will back up and just survey all the good that has come down to us from you, who never does change. You are the Father of lights, with whom there is no shadow of turning. You never change. We tend to. We're frail. You are not. We lack wisdom. You do not. You alone are wise. We can become quite weak and discouraged. You never are. You are the Almighty. You are the omniscient one. There's nothing. You see what's around the corner for us. You see what's around the corner for this nation. You see what's around the corner for the globe. You see what's around the corner for the church. Nothing surprises you. A lot surprises us. Nothing surprises you. But we want to just ask that we would be able to, in a fresh way, on a Sunday evening, just present ourselves, Lord, as living sacrifices. Make us keen and receptive, that we might be able to hear uniquely and distinctly what it is that we need to hear and know now. And then I would ask for the grace in advance again to be able to then to be able to receive and then be able to put into practice, and to be able to move out in a way that would bring you glory. Bless, dear Father, our speaker, your son, this servant of decades, in a way that is unique among us. Anoint the congregation, anoint the speaker, anoint this time, be glorified. And all God's people say, Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. You'll notice that the pastor in his prayer said, for decades. I want to tell you something. You notice that when I walked out here, I walked as if I was kind of old. So many people die in their 70s. When I got into the 80s, I was so relieved. I said, oh, thank God. Thank God. Somebody said, Pastor Lutzer, if you do exercises, you can extend your life by 15 years. I think they're right. I've been doing exercises now for 6 weeks, and I feel 15 years older already. One story from Texas. There was a guy from the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency in Washington, who went to a farmer in Texas and says, we believe that you are growing marijuana on your farm. The farmer said, oh, you can go wherever you like and check, but don't go to that field over there, but you can go anywhere else. And the officer took out his badge and shoved it in the farmer's face and said, look at this. I have the badge from the DEA, the whole American government I have behind me. The farmer said, oh, okay. So, as you might guess, he goes to that field first. A few moments later, the farmer hears the shriek, and the official is running across the field, and a great big bull is ready to gore him. And the farmer shouts, show him your badge! Show him your badge! Sometimes the government has authority, and sometimes it doesn't. Well, today it's my privilege to speak to you about a book that's coming out September the 1st this year, 2026. I want to tell you how the book came about. I want you to get a copy. In fact, right now, you could even be typing it into your phone. It's okay to use your phone occasionally. Typing it into your phone and pre-ordering it. It's entitled Marx and Moody, Two Contemporaries, Two Gospels, Two Tombstones, and One Choice. I want to tell you how it came about. First of all, also, and I know that this sounds like an ad, so let's get it over with. You ought to type in Harvest Publications Apologetics Cruise. God willing, Frank Turek, whom you've probably heard about, he was Charlie Kirk's mentor, he and I and Gary Hamrick, we're going to be leading a tour next June to Alaska, a cruise. So go to Harvest Publications and you can find out all the info, and try to sign up as soon as you can. I'm told that the ship is almost full. Well, Marx and Moody, Two Contemporaries, Two Gospels, and One Choice. We have lots to cover tonight. We're going to be talking about Marx, his life. We're going to talk about the manifesto, which I have up here. We're going to talk about how it came to America, democratic socialism, and all that. So thank you for joining us. How did this book come about? A year and a little bit ago, I was a co-leader to a tour of the sites of the Reformation in England. And Rebecca and I went early with a camera crew. The camera crew by the name is known as Raincome. You ought to really write that down as well and go to that website sometime, because they make absolutely fantastic Christian documentaries and so forth. And we went there early because I wanted to give a lecture at the tomb of Karl Marx. I wanted people to better understand Marxism, what's going on in the world, and so forth. And while I was preparing the lecture, it dawned on me that Karl Marx was a contemporary of D.L. Moody, the founder of Moody Bible Institute, Moody Church, where I served as pastor for 36 years. And I thought, well, that is very, very interesting. D.L. Moody, the great evangelist, the great Billy Graham of the 1800s, they were contemporaries for 46 years. So I gave a lecture entitled Moody and Marx, or Marx and Moody. And then afterwards, I discovered this. Moody preached, of course, to large crowds in London, 20,000 a night for 6 weeks without a microphone in the late 1800s. And I discovered that we have no evidence that Marx attended, but we do know that Frederick Engels, who helped write the Communist Manifesto, attended one of Moody's meetings. Interesting. I won't tell you everything he says, but he talks about the 20,000 people gathering into Agricultural Hall. He talks about the invitation. He talks about Moody's preaching. And then he says this, and this, of course, had already received a lot of attention in the manifesto because the manifesto had already been written. He said this. He said that this is an example of how the ruling class, which is known as the bourgeoisie, how they keep the proletariat, the working person, in check. They use religion. You know, in other words, be comfortable because you're being chiseled out of what you should receive here, but you'll get it eventually. Okay. Now, more fascinating, Marx is dead, Engels is still living, and he is reminiscing, why didn't England become communist? After all, the manifesto was written there. It was actually published in England for the first time in 1848. Why didn't England become communist? He said it was because of revivalists such as Moody and Sankey and the dangerous aid of the Salvation Army. If you know anybody from the Salvation Army, give them a shout out, thank them, because it's their organization, according to Engels, that helped so that England would not become communist. The roots in England were too deep. They were too deep for communism to penetrate. They didn't have enough thugs who were willing to pillage, to destroy, and to kill to bring about a communist revolution. Fascinating. Now, with all that background, that's how the book came about. I want you to understand this is a cover. It was actually shown on the screen. It is not the book because it's coming out in 2 months' time, but you can pre-order it, Marx and Moody. Now, I am the author of the Marx side. A professor at Moody Bible Institute who had previously written a book on D.L. Moody wrote the Moody side, and his name is Greg Quiggle. So it's Lutzer and Quiggle. It's a joint authorship, but I did Marx. And having been the pastor of Moody Church for so many years, I do know quite a bit about D.L. Moody. So with that intro, let's begin. I want to talk about his life and background. Marx was born in Trier, Germany, to Jewish parents. His father, Frederick, converted to Lutheranism when Karl was 6 years old. I won't go into all the details as to why and so forth. We have so much we have to get through. But Marx, of course, grew up, therefore. He had attended a Lutheran church and said some wonderful things about Jesus Christ. He said that apart from being joined to him, we can do nothing, and it could have been that he could have been in the ministry. But as many, and he knew about Martin Luther. Later on, he praised Luther. He said Luther was a monk who released the church from released people from the authority of the church. I have the responsibility of releasing them from capitalism. So if a revolution could begin in the minds of a monk, another revolution could begin in the minds of a philosopher. But as many parents have understood, sometimes you can raise a child well, and yet he goes off the rails. When he was 18 years old, his father wrote him a letter, and I have to read it. At times I cannot rid myself of ideas which arouse in me foreboding and fear when I'm struck as if by lightning. By the thought, is your heart in accord with your head and your talents? Has it room for gentler sentiments? And since the heart is obviously, catch this, animated and governed by a demon, not granted to all men, is that demon heavenly or is it Faustian? Fascinating. When you think of Faust, you probably think of the Middle Ages because there is many legends about Faust in the 1500s making a deal with the devil and going to hell. This is not the Faust that's being talked about. This Faust is the Faust that has been written by the Enlightenment scholar Johann Wolfgang Goethe. You have to be German in order to know how to pronounce it. As a matter of fact, I have to say this, that German is the only language in which you can say, I love you, and it sounds like a threat. Oh, do you want to settle that out in the hall? Now, Goethe's Faust is the Enlightenment Faust. And Rebecca and I were in Goethe's house in 1970, which is now a museum, of course. In it, and that was for emphasis, don't worry, we worked on this for days, didn't we, Pastor? Goethe's Faust makes a pact with the devil, Mephistopheles, signs it in blood. Mephistopheles helps him seduce a young woman. He obviously mistreats her. She ends up committing suicide, but she goes to heaven. But catch this. In the end, Faust outwits the devil and is saved by her prayers. Notice this Faust. You can make a deal with the devil and win in the end. And you'll understand why I think that there are times when I have to ask myself, did Marx make a deal with the devil and win in the end? By the way, one of the most quoted quotations of Karl Marx comes from Mephistopheles, the devil, who says this. Catch this. If you're taking notes, you ought to be writing this down. The devil says, everything that has come into existence is worthy of destruction. The devil is a destroyer. And it's not everything that has been created, but everything that has come into existence. I checked the German words because Karl Marx theoretically didn't believe in God. Now, Marx was absolutely obsessed with Satan. I don't want to take out time to read a lot of this, but just a few lines. In my book, I quote 5 or 6 of his poems, of his many poems about Satan. This is what Engels said about his mentor, Marx. With clenched fist and threatening fist, he rages as without rest, though 1,000 devils have taken him by the hair. And this is what Marx wrote. The hellish vapors rise and fill my brain. See this sword, the prince of darkness sold it to me. For he strikes the time and gives the sign. More boldly I will play the dance of death. Here's one that I want to read quickly, and then one other for a specific reason. Thus heaven have I forfeited. I know full well. My soul once true to God is chosen for hell. And then he says this, and this shows you his pride, and maybe he continued to believe in God, but just hated God. With disdain, I'll throw my gauntlet full in the face of the world and see the collapse of this pygmy giant, whose full ardor whose fall will not stifle my ardor. Then I will wander godlike and victorious through the ruins of the world, and giving my words an active force, I will feel equal with the Creator. Richard Wurmbrand, who was persecuted under communism in Romania, said that he believes that Marxism is collective demonization. Why? Because of the way in which these Marxists, their face lighted up with joy when they got to torture you. Now, you can imagine, why would a Romanian torture another Romanian with joy? It's got to be satanic. Now, there are many people who defend Marx, who say that I'm being critical, because after all, these were written when he was younger, in his 20s, before the manifesto. But when you look into his heart, I have to tell you, there's just a lot of darkness. His father wrote to him one time and said, "You are giving birth to monsters." His mother, fascinating, his mother said, "I wish Carl would earn some capital rather than just always writing about it." And that would have been a great idea. And by the way, I have to say this, time goes so quickly. In the manifesto, it says at the end, all rights of inheritance have to be abrogated. They have to be taken away. Why? Marx says everybody should begin at point zero. It's not right that some children inherit their parents' farms or their parents' wealth. When you die, everything that you own should go to the state, because actually it belongs to the state. And everybody should, there are those who, you hear this expression, who they end up on the third plate, that is, on third base, and they think that they got there, but actually they were born on third plate. And so everybody should begin at home plate. Now, so much for that. So here's the thing. What are the circumstances that brought about Marx's view? Well, I'll tell you very honestly, it was great injustice in England and all throughout Europe. He was talking about a very legitimate problem. The problem was the industrialization was causing a great difference between the owners, the bourgeoisie, and the workers, the proletariat. You see, the owners of the factories, they could pay their workers almost nothing. There was child labor. Nobody had anything to fall back on if they lost their job. Once they were fired, they were fired. And if they got sick or something, they just had to die. And this difference, the disparity between the owners, the landowners and the factory owners, and those who didn't own anything but had to work, was growing larger and larger, and there was huge injustice. No question about it, all throughout Europe and all throughout England. The question is, what should be done? So, what Marx decided, and by the way, Spurgeon lived during these times, the great preacher. He preached against socialism, by the way, and Engels said that in a game, when he was asked, who do you hate the most? He said instantly, Spurgeon, because Spurgeon was the great Christian preacher. Now, we're going to spend 15 minutes in the gospel of Marxism, which I call. It is really spending 15 minutes in the manifesto. This is a copy of the manifesto. The manifesto is only 40 pages in this book. The rest are essays on various aspects of communism. And isn't it interesting? At the back, this book, it says, the manifesto is an astonishing masterpiece. It has almost biblical force. So you had better know what the manifesto says, and I summarize it for you in 6 pillars, hollow pillars of Marxism. Let's get to them as quickly as we can. First of all, the abolition of private property. Marx says this, the theory of communism may be summed up in a single sentence, the abolition of private property. Why do you have wars? It's over property. Why do you have injustice? Well, you're trying to gain money for yourself, and you have no right to do that. Everything should be state-owned. What you do is, and everybody works for the state. They don't work for a factory. You work for the state, and the state does it just so perfectly that justice finally is achieved. You know, each according to his ability, to each according to his need. We'll talk about that when we talk about democratic socialism. So what you do is you leave the ruggedness of collectivism. Right here, what they say is fascinating because of its relevance. It says, you accuse us of wanting to do away with individualism. Precisely so. The manifesto is a very honest document. It does not try to hide their agenda, and it'll become even more clearly. They say, of course, you have to give up individualism, because what we're going to do is to be collective from now on, and you can't have individualism with that. The second thing is, faith in God has to be transferred to the state. You have to understand, why was Marx so anxious? And the very next one is the abolition of the family, because they go together. You have to understand this about Marxism, that the real issue always was this. The issue was oppression. You don't have any sin in you. No. You don't have any sin in you. The only reason you might do evil is because of oppression. We're going to take away all the oppression. And once the oppression is taken away, everybody's going to get along really wonderfully. And men oppress their wives. That's why they want to break up marriage. They say that here. They say marriage is just an economic relationship that we should do away with. They want to have the children taken away from the parents. The guy that I'm talking about here is Karl Marx, of course, and his assistant, namely Friedrich Engels. He wrote a book about the family. He said a child should be taken away from their parents as soon as it can exist without its mother. Why? Parents can't be trusted to educate a child. They might tell them about God. They will take them to church, and God is the ultimate oppressor. So we have to do away with all oppression, and lo and behold, finally, once the proletariat takes over, and the owners, the bourgeoisie, once they are killed off and taken care of, why then indeed, at last the state will be able to have fairness and justice and so forth. And this systemic evil that is taking place in our factories and in our lands is going to be done away with. You know, I always knew that it was important for us to say as Americans, and by the way, I was born in Canada. I'm a naturalized American citizen, and I'm very proud to be called an American, by the way. But the thing is that we always like to say, it's so important to have your rights to come from God and not the state. Absolutely. I didn't see this with the clarity with which I see it now. Because you see, why can't you criticize the state in a communist country? Well, the state didn't give you that right, thank you very much. And so you have no right to do it because we have not given you the right to criticize us. You have the right to live as long as we think that you have the right to live, but when we think you don't have the right to live, we take that right from you. So what they were saying is this: the abolition of the family, faith in God, has to be taken away and transferred to the state. The state will give you its daily bread. And it goes on to say, you want to abolish the family? Again, it says, exactly so. This is what we are proposing. This is what the Communist Manifesto says. Well, there's another really biggie here, and that is the fact that page 242. Wow, I've read this a number of times. Besides, there are eternal truths, such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all aspects of society. But communism abolishes all eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality. Instead of constituting them on a new basis, it therefore acts in contradiction to all past experience. I read this a couple of times before it dawned on me what it was actually saying. It was not just saying we abolish all eternal truths. Obviously, if you disbelieve in God, you have to abolish all eternal truths and all morality, ultimately, rationally. That's a different discussion. But you have to do that. But it says we don't even constitute truth on another basis. Wow. Why? Oh, you go into Hegel, who greatly influenced Marx. Reality is constantly in a flux. It's constantly in a flux. It's constantly in movement. So there's no such thing as an absolute truth. And parents, grandparents, here's the deal. Let's just have a chit-chat for a moment. You send your kid to university, and you come back, and they come back, and you say later, our kids no longer think like we do. No, they don't. Because when you and I were growing up, we actually believed that truth was objective. It was outside of ourselves. We might argue as to how to get there or whether or not we had gotten there. But it was something that we sought that was outside of us. What Karl Marx is saying, and out of this, of course, you have such things as deconstruction and the whole bit. What Marx is saying is that you no longer have that. You now have to transfer truth to flux. So that's where you get this crazy idea that you have your truth, I have my truth. Why is it that the LGBTQ plus community, as well as, the transgender community, has made so much progress so quickly? It's because truth no longer has to be rooted in biology or logic or common sense. Truth now can be whatever you want it to be or whatever you think justice requires. It's up to you. It's how you feel. I feel that so-and-so should have this right. I feel that. Well, of course then, you've lost track of truth. Truth no longer exists objectively. And by the way, progressivism began with Hegel, and that's the whole idea of progressivism. Progressivism means change is always good. So what we have to do is we have to make change. And in doing this, we have to recognize there are no fixed eternal truths. It does away with all religion, all morality. And maybe I read it, but it's there, where it says that it is the greatest break from all traditional historical experience. So you have no idea what's going to be true tomorrow, really. And so the stability that you and I had when we went to school, we believed in objectivity. In fact, I've written several books about the culture, 3 or 4, and in one of them, I quote a teacher who says that when you're reading a text, this has to do with deconstruction, when you're reading a text, the meaning is not found within the text, it's found within you. The question you have to ask is, what does it mean to me? And what hidden issues of power lie behind this? So, you don't know what you're reading. There's no real stability because truth is constantly changing. By the way, when Jesus was standing before Pilate, Pilate said, "Are you the king?" And Jesus said this, "For this cause I came into the world, that I might bear witness to the truth. And whoever is of the truth hears my voice." And Pilate said, "What is truth?" And then he went out and talked to the mob. Isn't it something? And I give a separate lecture, by the way, so you have to have me back, Pastor, on this. Why in the world people believe in God, but why Jesus over against all the religions of the world? That's a separate thing. But Pilate learned this: you can crucify a man, but you can't crucify truth. Truth is still truth, and Jesus had every reason to say, "Ich bin der Weg und die Wahrheit und das Leben. Niemand kommt zum Vater denn durch mich." I thought I'd throw that in. That's actually German, and you can now say that they speak in tongues at Calvary. The point is this: Jesus had every right to say he was the way, the truth, and the life. Kill him, but you can't kill truth. Well, okay, now we get to the biggie. When I came across this, I said to myself, I now understand Marxism. Everybody likes to read the last words of the Communist Manifesto. Working men of all countries unite. As a matter of fact, it's on Marx's tombstone. The reason I'd like you to stay for the second section that we will get to is I want to tell you what's on his tombstone and also Moody's. But don't get anxious. We're a long way from that break that's coming up, okay? Listen to this. This occurs just before those words that are so often quoted. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist revolution. The proletarians, that is the owners, the proletarians who are the workers, they have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Later on, Marx says in a different document, he says that we will make the revolution as violent as possible, and we will not apologize for it. So that's why about 140 million people have been killed as the revolutions take place to bring about the Marxist regime. Now, also, what else they believe? Yeah, the violent overthrow, I think that's listed in your notes, but also a borderless world. Marx says it, no borders, universal currency, universal bank, etc., etc. Now, you have to understand the difference between communism and fascism. You know, in the news sometimes they throw out all these categories and so forth, and they confuse them. Let me explain it this way. Fascism is very nationalistic. By the way, I sometimes also give a lecture on Christian nationalism, 5 different ways to view the cross and the flag. But that's separate too today, because you don't want to be here tomorrow morning. But the point is this, that is fascism. Hitler was a fascist. Mussolini was a fascist, but communism is different. Because communism says the only thing that divides us is economic disparities. So a person should be able to leave any country they want, go anywhere that they want to establish their own ownership. There should not be borders. And what we have to do is to have a borderless world. I wish I had the actual quote here. Well, maybe I do, from the manifesto. But that's exactly what it's talking about, is the need to recognize that communism opens up everything for everybody, because borders are oppressive. They keep you confined. Now, I want to say that biblically, not only does God approve of borders, but there's no such thing in the Bible as this idea that I have the right to be able to enter into any kind of a country I want whenever I want. And this whole business of borders, oy vey, I'd better get on, because it really, on the one hand, you want to be compassionate. On the other hand, what's happening oftentimes is very long-term destructive. But let's leave that for another time. But Marxists are for open borders, and they say that. Now, how is Marxism applied? You'll notice the next point there in your outline. Marxism applied. In 1985, I was preaching in Russia and the Ukraine, and my interpreter, a very godly man, he said, "You Americans are too quick to judge." And we are, aren't we? We look at the country like Russia and we say, why would it turn communist? You have to understand, there was so much turmoil in the country. My interpreter and his family lived in a barn during the days of Tsar Nicholas. Tsar Nicholas, because he and his wife were off. She was, of course, in touch with an occultist by the name of Rasputin, and he was giving her bad advice. And the people, my interpreter and his family lived in a barn all winter, trying to scrounge around for food during the last days of the czars. So Lenin comes along, and he has this idea of the overthrow of the government, and the overthrow, actually, if you were in that situation, it would sound pretty good to you, because you wouldn't see all the consequences that are involved. And so what Stalin did, and by the way, he loved the word collectivism. His farms were collective farms. He wanted to leave the rugged individualism of most farmers in Illinois, for the warmth of collectivism. And they grew a grain, and they had to give it to him so that he could pay the debts of the nation. Millions starved. Millions. It's deserving of tears. And then Rebecca and I have been to Albania twice. I've been preaching there. The last time I preached there, a couple of years ago, was to 1,800 people on the topic of 1 minute after you die. But Albania, oh, I can't tell you about it here. It just, if you had a child with a biblical name, Peter, Thomas, Ruth, whatever, Mary, you had till the end of the year to change the name of the child, because there could be no biblical name that you could have. Every Bible destroyed. Do you know what missionaries used to do? They would put New Testaments into plastic bags and send them down the river, hoping that missionaries would find them. You and I have no idea the things that we saw. The museum dedicated to those horrible days is enough to keep you awake at night. That's Marxism applied. How does Marxism come to America? All right, now, here's Mussolini, and he has a very brilliant Italian who's sitting in jail. This Italian, his name is Antonio Gramsci, of all things. He is contemplating how to get Marxism to America. He was a very dedicated Marxist. I'm told he was very smart. And he wrote a paper on how Marxism could come to America. He believed that it could not come through a revolution like Russia. Russia was a very bad example and was not a good advertisement for how to bring communism here. So that's why we have today, one of the reasons we have today, cultural Marxism. The gradual march through the institutions to bring it about gradually. And Gramsci says, you know, once people begin to see its benefits, they're going to say to themselves, oh my, this is just wonderful. And then they'll go the whole way. But it wouldn't be wise to begin a revolution. Now, he saw three barriers. Number one, three roadblocks. Number one was Christianity. We had to get rid of that. Secondly, the family. And thirdly, capitalism. So how are you going to do it? Now, here's the most fascinating thing that he wrote for us as Christians. He said that the church can also be used. And this is the way he said it can be done. And he's talking about the Catholic Church, which was strong in Italy, and he said that priests and leaders who know what they're doing can use the church to bring about communism. How? He said, take passages of Scripture, like Jesus said, it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Take phrases like this, or blessed are the poor in spirit, and so forth. And here's the whole thing, and I'm giving you only the last sentence. It is a question of translating the religious language into historical, political language, or showing how the same aspirations that Christianity places beyond this world can be used to show and brought about through collectivism here on earth. Fascinating stuff. What he's saying is that you translate the language of heaven to the cultural paradise here on earth and blast the rich, because after all, they are the ones, it's because of the fact that you are rich that they are rich, that others are poor, which isn't true, by the way, but that's something else I get into the book and a little later. Now, that's exactly what happened, of course, during what was known as liberation theology in the Catholic Church, and that's what has happened in some of our churches too. I don't want to get into social justice here, because there are aspects of it that may be very legitimate that we need to be able to speak to and to respond to, but at the same time, let us remember that many churches did translate the language of heaven to the language on earth, and thought that they'd be able to bring about social justice here. Do you want a direct quote? I've already given you one from Gramsci, but I'll give you one more. Quote, socialism is precisely the religion that must kill Christianity. So, how did Marxism come to the United States? In what ways? Well, let me list these ways very quickly. Number one, history. Rewrite the history. You know that, what's his name? George Orwell. George Orwell says the most effective way to destroy a people is to destroy its history. What you do is, and communism does this all the time. I still remember the days, I think, when Leningrad was Leningrad, then it turned into Stalingrad, and now it's back to St. Petersburg, I think. And so what you do is you say, we have a brand new beginning. We have a brand new beginning here, and what we have to do is to destroy the past. The past can't be fixed. It has to be rewritten. Schlesinger, who was a confidant of President Kennedy, said this. Think these things through, folks. He said, history is to a nation what memory is to a person. Now, if a person forgets his memory, I mean, if he no longer has his memory, he doesn't know who he is. He can be told he's whoever somebody tells him he is. Once again, I want to quote, put it this way, I'll take time to say this. You're coming out of a 17th century building, you're walking down the street, the building back behind you is very impressive. You turn a corner and you don't see that building anymore. The left wants us to turn a corner in America so we no longer see our Christian past, but everything is vilified. This is not to say that the evils of America should not be studied. Absolutely. We have to be honest. America is not perfect, and it absolutely never will be. So we acknowledge our faults, but we also move forward. Once again, if I might quote none other than George Orwell, regarding communism, the past was erased. The erasure was forgotten. The lie became the truth. So, do they want to change that? Yeah, for sure. One other thing, and that is I'm going to talk about DEI for just a moment. When I became pastor of Moody Church in 1980, we worked toward racial reconciliation. As a matter of fact, at Moody Church, how many of you have never been to Moody Church? Could I see your hands, please? Boy, Rebecca, that's scary. Do you see these numbers of people? It's not necessary to attend Moody Church to go to heaven. But why take a chance? At any Sunday morning, we had 70 countries of origin represented, and we took a survey several times. In fact, I think that's still true today. People from every nation and tongue and everything, because we're all going to be around the throne. But then, when the year turned 2000 and following, things became more difficult. Why? Saul Alinsky, who was there in Chicago, saw the opportunity to take Marxist principles and apply them to race. And the whole struggle is now going to be between the oppressed and the oppressor. Through the providence of God, and my whole life has been the providence of God, I have to say, if you're ever blessed because of something I've said or something you've read that I've written, give God the glory. Don't give me any of it. I happened to meet a man who worked with Saul Alinsky. And he said, we had good plans how to help the under-resourced neighborhoods in Chicago, but Alinsky blocked them and said, we are not here to solve problems, we are here to use problems. He foresaw that if he stirred up Marxist principles, then what we could have in Chicago and throughout the nation is perpetual hostility and opposition versus accusation and so forth going on. So it has become more difficult. The next is the obliteration of the family. Well, you already know what's happening in your school systems. I don't know how it is here, but I can tell you in Illinois, it's scary. I've written about this in other things I've written, and so forth. And what they want us to do, our children to do, is to hate your parents, to hate your country, and to hate capitalism. And so that's the agenda, and that's exactly what Gramsci said we should do. I should tell you how this all came through in Frankfurt, Germany, and our university there in New York, and so forth, but we have to skip this. A man was preaching, and he was preaching too long, and he said, doesn't anybody have a clock around here? And somebody at the back, and I always try to keep my eyes on the people at the back, said, no, Pastor, but there is a calendar on the wall over there. I'm not letting you out yet. You don't have your break coming to you, because the next thing is democratic socialism. Well, why is it that democratic socialism is catching on in America? I'll give it to you in a single sentence. If you write it down, you'll always have an answer. All this tonight is free. Because people judge it by its promises and not its results. The dream is free. Who doesn't want free health care, free transportation, low rent, a universal basic wage, and you can go on and on and on. Who doesn't want that? Everybody wants that. The question is, how is the dream fulfilled? The answer is, it is impossible. By the way, I have to throw this in. You guys have no place to go tonight, do you? No. Did Marx distinguish socialism and communism? Throughout the manifesto, he uses the terms interchangeably, but in one place he says this: after socialism has done its work, the communists will take over, and they are the ones with the true knowledge and know how things are to be done and so forth, and they will distribute everything very evenly, obviously, and lo and behold, paradise is coming. And did he believe in democracy? Yes, I have to throw this in. In the manifesto, he says that once communism is finished, the revolution is over, everybody who needs to be killed has been killed, at last democracy will have been achieved. So it depends on how you use the words. Now, what happens when socialism is involved? What if you fix the prices of rent? You know, rent is too high. Are people going to invest in rental property? Of course not. Of course not. What you're going to find is that you soon run out of money. Margaret Thatcher said it correctly. The problem with socialism is pretty soon you run out of other people's money. Secondly, it does not meet people's needs. You know, I remember the demonstrators shout, capitalism is based on greed, socialism is based on need. Really? It's based on need. Isn't that interesting? No, it's not. You don't have to meet anybody's needs. When I was in Russia, I remember my interpreter said that there was a factory that was making shoes that nobody could wear because the contour was on the wrong side. Instead of on this side, it should be on the other side. He said the warehouse was full of shoes, but nobody cared. They got their money, whatever it was, per hour, as long as they got their money. They didn't care that they were making somebody that nobody needed. We have a friend from Romania who worked in a factory that was making steel. It was steel nobody could use for anything because it was made with the wrong ingredients. They didn't care. They just showed up, and lo and behold, they did it, and they got their money, and they didn't care that they were producing somebody that nobody needed. You know, in Israel, they decided that they were going to run a kibbutz based on socialism. So there was free lighting, free meals, free this, and they had to stop it because they said that it became a haven for, let me get this correctly now, a haven for parasites. Yeah, I'm missing a word here. Once you're my age, sometimes the right word doesn't come. A paradise for parasites. I thought about it and it came back. A paradise for parasites. It's all free. One of the best ways, and the way I would explain socialism to teenagers or to children or to adults, is this. Let us suppose that you are a professor in a college. And you know, you say this, what we're going to do at the end of the semester, it isn't fair that some of you get better grades than others. Because some of you have more brains, you have more initiative than others, and we want to make this as fair as possible. So we're going to average the grades at the end of the semester. And everybody's going to get the very same kind of a grade. Would that give the students initiative? Would that give them initiative? Would they say, wow, that's exciting. Each according to his ability, to each according to his need. I need a higher grade if I'm going to get anywhere in life. I can't get a higher grade. I don't want to work as hard as it takes. And you have the ability to do it, each according to his ability, according to each, according to his need. Isn't that ever wonderful? You think that, boy, that's one way to it. Listen, the cell phone, Boeing jets would have never been invented in a purely socialistic world, because it's like a caste system. Once you're put behind in a certain category, that's where you stay. You don't have rugged individualism that's willing to take some risks and maybe do something new or invent something new, because that could fail. And we have to leave the ruggedness of individualism to the warmth of collectivism. We do everything together. We don't have freedom in that sense, but we are going to do it. By the way, I was going to make a distinction between the democratic socialism and pure communism, because the democratic socialists are not telling us we can't worship God or we can't have our own religion, but they will try to find ways to limit what we can do. But that's a separate story that you can work out on your own. So, very quickly, it also contributes to corruption. Why? Well, think of it this way. You want to get more money for your family, and you can't. You know what we discovered in Russia in 1985? There was a whole shadow economy. The Christians told us about it. They said that the amount of money that the state gives you, you can't live on, so you have to find alternative ways. So here's somebody who has a garden outside of the city, and they will give you a bushel of potatoes if you come and if you fix their doors and windows, which don't work when you buy a condo in Russia, and we'll come over and we'll do this and you give us this. The whole thing was based on this shadow economy, because you can't live on what the government gives you. And of course, if you criticize the rich, let me talk about the rich for a moment. I need to talk about 10% of you. I just need to always make sure you're awake. All the warnings that Jesus gives about the rich have to be taken very, very seriously. Very seriously. But when they talk about the rich, I'm talking about the socialists, you know, those billionaires out there, those billionaires. Okay, I looked up on the internet yesterday or the day before, how many people does Elon Musk employ? Directly, 140,000. Indirectly, 750,000. By indirectly, we mean those who are subcontractors and so forth. So, in the minds of many people, it's breaking into a bank, finding $1 billion, and giving it out to everybody. But actually, that's not the way capitalism works. If you're becoming a capitalist and becoming wealthy, it's probably because you're employing people and you're helping them with job. And Elon Musk, no matter what you might say about him, I have never met him, I don't know all that he's doing, I sure don't understand it, but the point is he's making lots of millionaires along the way. So the economy is actually integrated like that. Now, let me quote Churchill, and then I'll give you another quote, and then please come back. Please come back. It's going to be short, but I need to talk about Moody. I need to talk about the graves. I need to talk about legacy. I need to speak very briefly about what Marx got wrong and Moody got right. But first of all, two quotations. None other than Winston Churchill. The great vice of capitalism is the unequal distribution of blessings. The great virtue of socialism is the equal distribution of misery. That's a pretty accurate quote. Now, one other thing. You may wonder, why would a pastor take an interest in economics? Why should we do that? Shouldn't I just preach the gospel? Well, you know that I've given my life to preaching the gospel. But the point is this, folks. I have a friend who gave a lecture on Christian nationalism and basically said it doesn't matter what government we have because Christ is the great hope for the world, not America. Well, who would argue with that? Of course Christ is the great hope for America. But Rebecca and I have been in 10 or 12 countries overseas, and I have to tell you this. Every ministry that we know about, and there are others, every ministry is funded by American dollars. There's no nation on earth that has spent as many millions and millions of dollars to send tens of thousands of missionaries around the world, all funded by American dollars. And one of the reasons that America has been able to do that is because of the rugged individualism versus some kind of a collectivism that is constantly taking away our freedoms and is making sure that we give to, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. By the way, Marx didn't define what it was to have need. Wants can become needs, and it gets hugely complicated. One more quote, and then you do get your break. And then I want you to come back, and that is this. Why is it that people continue to vote for these kinds of candidates? In their hearts, they probably know it's not going to go well, but it sounds so good. And I don't know where this quote comes from, but I quote it in my book. My editor was not able to find its source, but it is this. The forest kept shrinking. Oh, by the way, before I give it to you, you don't think government's important? Has anybody told you that there's no such thing as a Calvary Chapel in North Korea? Did you know that? Did you know that there's no Calvary Chapel in North Korea? Anyway, here's the quote. The forest kept shrinking, but the trees kept voting for the axe because it had a wooden handle, and they thought that because it had a wooden handle, it was one of them. Be very careful when it comes to politics. It can get very, very messy. But thank God for those Christians who can still run here for office. And all that we can do is to realize that without a spiritual revival, we will not turn back, because the more we drift, the more difficult it is to come back apart from God's sovereign and gracious help. All right, 10 minutes, be back, please, please.
Okay, folks, we're going to join back in the room here. We've got round two. All the good stuff's coming.
Could I have 1 minute before they turn on the cameras?
Yes, 1 minute before you turn the cameras on, guys. Can you put it on? Can you pause it for a second?